Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Book Cafe podcast. This is actually a special episode because it's being done in collaboration with the Sticky Wickets podcast. Today we will be talking to Mr. Sumit Chakraberty, the author of Master Laster, What They Don't Tell You About Sachin Tendulkar. So the book right behind me. So it's a very interesting book that I just had the pleasure of reading recently, and it's just I'm sure it's going to be a mind blowing discussion. So without before I go any further, let me first introduce the author himself, Mr. Shumit Chakrabarty. Hi, Shumit.
Hi, Omar. Very nice to be here and talking to your listeners. Are they mostly in Bangladesh?
Yes, mostly in Bangladesh, but we because we cover it in English, we also have a huge base outside of Bangladesh, Australia, Canada, wherever you find the Bengali diaspora. So we're
Yeah.
trying to reach out to a global audience. So hence one of the reasons why we've very consciously done this in English. But do tell us a little bit about yourself, Shumit, that for our viewers and our listeners who may be discovering you for the very first time. We'd love to know a little bit more about yourself and your background and what you do for a living, etc., etc. So do please take it away. The floor is yours.
I'll try to keep it short. I love to talk about myself. So my ethnic roots are actually in Bangladesh. Both my parents, their families came from Sylhet. আমি কইতে ফার্মুক একটু একটু সিলেটি of course, my mother's side, they migrated to Kolkata about 10 years before partition. My father's side had a tougher time. They had to leave property and all that. And they also moved to West Bengal, where Bardhaman. And my dad did his schooling in Assam. My grandfather was a headmaster in Tejpur, and he fortunately was a good student. He had a gold medal and all, so he got a scholarship in Dhanbad School of Mines, and which kind of saw him through because it was a tough time during partition. So after that, he landed up in northern Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh is a state in South India, and they have a very big mining corporation there, forest area and all that. And that's where I was born, and I grew up there. Did all my schooling in a city called Hyderabad in Andhra Pradesh. And yeah, I should have probably ended up being an engineer. I was pretty good in maths and physics in school. I landed in BITS Pilani, which is India's top private engineering college. But I dropped out. I'm an engineering dropout. I ended up being a writer and a journalist, which I don't regret. I love books and I love to read and write. So I've basically been a journalist in all forms of media, like in first in newspapers, and then I was a TV journalist for a brief stint, and then digital media. I worked for a company in Singapore called Tech in Asia, covering the startup scene across Asia. That was really good fun, and I still write about both startups and cricket, based in Bangalore in India. Never having been in Bangladesh, I once at a tech conference in Nepal, I met somebody who runs an accelerator in Dhaka, and he actually invited me, and I would have loved to have been there. I regret never having gone to Sylhet with my parents. I've heard so many tales about crossing the Podda River and how in a boat and how dangerous it used to be and all that, but I've never seen the land of rivers and tributaries, right? It must be beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, you've actually guessed my second question, which was going to be that given your ancestral roots in Sylhet, have you ever had an opportunity to come to Bangladesh? But you've already answered that question for me. So, but yes, I believe that you would love it if you ever have an opportunity to come across the border. It's a small nation, but I think that whatever we have built here since independence in 1971. I think that anybody with roots in Bangladesh will be very proud of what we've managed to accomplish here. And so it's basically Hyderabad where you're settled right now. Have I understood that correct?
No, I'm in Bangalore,
Oh,
which is
Bangalore.
basically the tech capital of India.
Yeah.
It's like the land of startups, and that's how I ended up writing about startups, and I love it. I mean, the people, these founders of startups, they have such a different attitude, and they're such interesting characters. So I love to write about them.
So when I think of Bangalore, Karnataka, I obviously Rahul Dravid is one player that comes to mind, and I
Yes.
believe Venkatesh Prasad is also from Bangalore.
And Javagal Srinath and Anil Kumble.
And Javagal Srinath and Anil Kumble. Well, who can forget that wonderful new ball pairing in the early and late 90s? So that's absolutely wonderful. So, Shweta, coming back to the book itself, Master Laster, I'm assuming that it's a play on the words Master Blaster. So, when I, as I mentioned just before we started this interview, that I actually love to read multiple books concurrently, and I had a choice between reading Master Laster or Ben Stokes' autobiography On Fire or Marcus Scofick's autobiography, and all three were brilliant books, but it was your book Master Laster that I finished first, even though I had started it way after I had started the other books. I just couldn't put it down because it was quite the page turner. But for our viewers and listeners who haven't actually read the book yet, can you just tell us what the book is actually about and what the title is actually supposed to mean?
So the book is a myth buster, and that's why the title. Mythbuster, in the sense, what's the myth that it busts? It busts the myth that Sachin is the god of Indian cricket. I mean, that's what he's referred to, isn't it? So I found, especially in the second half of his career, and through many crucial matches, and being a very passionate follower of cricket, it always got my goat that he was often a self-serving god. And nobody talks about it, right? Because I mean, everyone talks about it, but nobody talks about it on the record. I used to have a personal blog on cricket, and one day the chief editor told me, "Hey, why don't you, start writing a column in the paper?" So that's how I started writing, and the myth busting thing came up because in sports journalism there's a lot of fawning, and some of it you can understand because people need interviews, people need to be invited to events, to matches, and all that. And here's this person, who is being built up so much. And sports marketing is a huge thing, right? You want to build up a character into a larger than life figure because that's what draws eyeballs, and that perception kind of becomes the reality, and even those who worship heroes, it's like Marvel comics. You want to sort of, because you can't do it yourself, maybe you want to feel that somebody is superhuman, right? Cricket is all about talking, right? You want to talk about tactics, strategies, persons, weaknesses, strengths. When you really sit down to talk about it, it would keep coming up, Sachin being quite self-serving a lot of the times, going after milestones. So nobody would talk about it, and people would keep saying, they would sense this, but they wouldn't know exactly how to pin it down. So at one point I decided, there's enough of debate over this. Let me sit down, and because in an article you can't really, there'll always be holes, there'll always be counter arguments. So I wanted to put that point across very strongly and with data. I don't think there is any personal dig I've taken at Tendulkar in the entire book. I felt that it at least one person had to put it all down, right? Because nobody would in the sports journalism sector, nobody would really do that. So long ago, in my cub reporter days, I had met a famous editor, Simon Jones. He was the editor of Sunday Times, the iconic newspaper in London, right?
Right.
And I had asked him, and he used to write a twice weekly column. And I asked him, how do you pick, subjects to write about? Because he was so eclectic. He used to write about this, that, and the other. So he told me something that stayed in my mind. He said, like, I'll pick something that gets under my skin, research the hell out of it, and then write. And this was something like that, this had got under my skin because there are so many instances where, and the legions of fans, right, all wanting India to win, all cheering for him. And here's this guy going after a milestone with almost no regard for what the team required at a particular stage of a game. And there's so many instances of that I thought it had to be nailed. And that's the intention of the book. In other sports also, like football, say, once upon a time, people would not pass, right? They would go for the goal themselves. Then the concept of the assist came in, which was given almost equal credit as the striker, right? Mm-hmm. So in a team game, that is what you have to do. You have to sacrifice your self-interest at some points for the larger team goal. I mean, literally goal. So anyway, so I hope I've been able to express what I set out to do in the book.
Yes,
the
for
yardsticks that you look at for measuring a batsman or a bowler in cricket has to change. It can't be based on aggregate number of centuries and various milestones like that. It has become a little more so now with franchise cricket. People are assessing people on the basis of team results, game situations, etc., but not yet, well.
Yeah, definitely. And Shumita, I think you've said it very succinctly when you compared Sachin Tendulkar to a Marvel comic character, where at times we see that, a character can be very bland or two-dimensional. But I think that the best part of this book, in my opinion, is the fact that you were able to present a three-dimensional Tendulkar, not just the comic book superhero per se, but a flawed individual who has had, his strengths, his moments in the sun, but also his weaknesses. So, do you feel that in that sense you've helped to present a contrarian truth to the world as far as Sachin Tendulkar is concerned?
Yes, I mean, make no mistake about it. I mean, I absolutely admired Tendulkar's batting. I think it was wonderful to see. Uh, and it gave so much pleasure to so many people. I'm not undermining that at all. But you needed that warts and all picture. Otherwise it's boring. I mean, you keep praising the guy, and most of the time it's not true. It's boring, and actually it demeans a person. You're not really looking at the real genius of the guy. I mean, what were you doing when you were 15 years old? Think about what you were doing when you were 15, right? And this guy was in the Indian team facing, like, I think Wasim Akram, Wakar Yunus in New Zealand. He almost reached a century. That would have been the youngest ever test century. I think he fell short by 8 runs. And then, like, when he was 16, he went to Manchester, and in a match that India were losing, he held on and played it out to a draw with, I think, Manoj Prabhakar or some bowler for company. So that's a fantastic talent, right? Unfortunately, I think the marketing hype and everything around building a persona like that, and that was like early days of one-day cricket, right? Where this was getting built up, this huge hype over superheroes. So that ultimately it got to him, and that's human. I suppose it's difficult not to fall into that trap of playing for milestones, because that's what is getting promoted, right? I mean, how many centuries and your 100th century and so on, so forth. So it's difficult. And he came from a very middle class background in Bombay, where the urge to succeed, the drivers to success were so ingrained and built into you, right? So you have to think about making it yourself first. In a team game, that doesn't work. And there was a stage in his career where he could have let those things by and just focused on building the team. Why he didn't? He's human. The human frailty.
Human frailty. Yes, absolutely. Shumita, tell me something. Sachin Tendulkar had retired in the year 2013 after a 24-year international career. But with regards to your plan for writing the book, obviously it must have taken root sometime before 2013, I'm guessing, the year that the book was actually published. So can you tell us how long back you've been thinking about this particular project? And was it a coincidence that it came out in 2013, or was it always planned that that would be the year that you would like to have the work published?
Actually, I didn't plan it that much. The trigger for it was, like I told you, I was writing a column in a newspaper. And I think I wrote a piece which was called Master Laster because, you know, maybe it was after the milestone of 100 centuries, which was actually achieved in Bangladesh in a one-day match. And, like we lost that game, India lost that game. And the pictures you saw were of Tendulkar cutting a cake and celebrating, his 100th ton. And I thought that was so incongruous. I mean, this team, and by then, like, this was a formidable team, right? And Bangladesh was actually no match for India. But the guy, I mean, he got to his century in some 150 balls. You can't, imagine that in today's cricket, right? I mean, that's like a strike rate of 65 or something. And for that article, when I actually looked into it, his second 50 was lower than his first 50, which should not be in a one-day game when you're going strong, right? And he actually, in the last 7 balls to get to his century, I think he took some 3 or 4 overs. So it was, it just was galling for somebody who had followed the game for so long, right? So, and to see all the celebrations around it. So I wrote a contrarian piece called Master Laster. That kind of stayed with me because there was a lot of debate around that article. A lot of people who called up the newspapers saying like we were courageous to take a contrarian stand on the celebration of the 100th milestone. We actually blasted it. So that debate was very interesting, and a lot of people then started asking questions about this and that, but what about that? But what about this? So, that was the germ of the idea that, hey, I mean, it has to be more than an article. If you really want to make this point, you have to go much deeper. So that's the germ of the idea of the book. Jumping into the book itself was kind of spur of the moment. I just decided to do it. I mean, I had so much to say, and I had followed the game so closely that writing it itself actually took me just 1 month to write the book. But I spent the next 2 months just revising it and checking for facts, because I knew that if I had got one thing wrong in it, there is one error somewhere, nothing to do with Tendulkar, something about Azharuddin. There is one error that crept in. But apart from that, I really did, screening. And having been an editor in a newspaper, I was used to doing that sort of thing. Because I knew that people would pick on 1 or 2 holes and, blast the whole book. Anyway, people were going to blast it. But I thought, let me not give them more, grist for the mill by ensuring there were no errors. So I took 2 months to clean it up. And yeah, it was nice. I thought that it should come out during his last series in India.
Understood. Yeah, I can say that I think I was at the ground when he made that 100th, and I was in one sense I was quite happy that Mirpur and the great man would forever be conjoined because of this one particular milestone. And yet at the end, I was also happy that Bangladesh did manage to win that particular match. And I think I could just see that there was so much relief on his face when he managed to hit that milestone. That he took out his helmet and his bat, and he was tapping the badge. So that, but like you said, at the end of the day, India did go on to lose that match. So, and they weren't able to get to the finals as a result. Again, I think that there's a lot of people who would have focused on the century itself instead of saying that, hey, you know what, the emperor has no clothes. At the end of the day, India wasn't able to actually get to the finals. So what good did it do to anybody?
And to be fair to Sachin, I think you have to, it's hard for any of us to imagine the pressure on the guy, right, to achieve that milestone. And towards the end of his career, he was actually struggling. I mean, he shouldn't have been in the team in the last, maybe couple of years. You know, and it kept eluding him for so long, right? I think I don't remember for how long, but more than a year, definitely. I remember I was on a match. I was watching a match in Bombay between India West Indies, test match, and I was in the sports gallery, and they had made an absolute dodo of a wicket, to make sure that the 100th ton would come on home ground. So, like it was a test match, and Wankhede in Bombay has one of the more sporting pitches in India, right? I mean, good help for pace bowlers and spinners, good bounce, very sporting wicket. That's what makes Test cricket very interesting in that venue. Anyway, on this wicket, 2 days the West Indies batted, in 2 days India batted. Tendulkar got into the 90s, and then I don't know, maybe Darren Sammy, he went for a ball, hitting a ball on the outside off stump, nicked it to slip and got out, I think 93 or something. I was during lunch in the press gallery. Gavaskar was around. So I went up to him, and I didn't know him, but I just asked him, what do you think? I mean, has this pitch been made for a milestone or a good cricket match? What is more important according to you? And Gavaskar has been a big, he keeps talking up Tendulkar, but he just grabbed me by the, my shirt sleeve, and he's quite strong. I realized that his wrists and hands, small guy, but very strong. He just actually pulled me and took me to the, the organizing committee guy there at Bombay, I don't remember. And he told me, you tell this man exactly what you told me. So, like it really, that is not how a milestone should come, right? I mean, what is the point of achieving a milestone like that in dead game? As it turned out, the match was so boring that I didn't go for the fifth day. And fifth day, the damn pitch absolutely crumbled, and both sides got bowled out, and it ended up in a tie. So that was a fascinating fifth day, which I missed. You never can say in cricket, right? 4 absolutely soporific days and 1 day of complete drama.
That's very interesting. Well, I had the pleasure of meeting Sunil Gavaskar once. This was way back in 1998, and I would not have imagined him being as strong as you just said. But yeah, I found him to be a very cordial person, and he had a he had a program on Star Sports at the time called Gavaskar Beyond the Boundaries. So I was very young. I think I might have asked him a question about I can't seem to remember at the time, but Shumita, coming to Mr. Gavaskar, you made a very interesting comparison in the book where you asked the question, who is the real little master? Is it Sachin Tendulkar or Sunil Gavaskar? So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I can recall, out of the 3,400s that Mr. Gavaskar had hit, only 6 of them had actually resulted in victory for India, while the others came in draws and losses. So, in that sense, do you feel that when you say that Gavaskar is the real little master and not Tendulkar, is that being a bit harsh on Sachin, or do you feel that it is well justified?
It's a really good question. Okay, and I'm glad that you looked up the record and saw that. And that's why you need a book, right? I mean, when you want to answer a question like that, it's not possible on a podcast, but I'll attempt it. You need to write a book to answer that question. So let me tell you, the first reaction is that in different eras, it's really difficult to compare on the basis of statistics because conditions are different, opposition is different, the team you're playing in is different, everything is different. So that chapter in the book is more a subjective assessment, not so much based on data, because that is the only way you can do it. That's what I feel. Because if you look at, stats, Gavaskar got into the Indian team at a time when, India was not the formidable force in world cricket, right? I mean, the West Indies were like, whoa. Tendulkar played in an era where India was actually, I mean, they're definitely better than anybody else at home, and they were, you know, they didn't win as much as they should have, which is one of the problems I have with Tendulkar's record. But they were a match for anybody else. Gavaskar, as a captain, he was the first captain who had a positive record. He won 9 matches, 9 test matches, and he lost 8. There was a humongous amount of draws, like 47 draws. But when you think about it, would you rather have those draws or would you have losses? I mean, would you have been happy if Gavaskar had a record like his predecessor, Nawab of Pataudi? He was so famous, right? First time he won for India outside the subcontinent in New Zealand and all that. But Pataudi at the end of the day had 9 test wins and he had 19 losses. Although he came up with the spin trio and all that. Refusing to lose is also a sort of winning, and there was a test series in India against the West Indies, and the West Indies were formidable. I mean, we did beat them in the 1971 series, Gavaskar's debut series, but after that they thrashed us around. So this particular series, Gavaskar was the captain, and it was I think five match series, and we ended up winning. I mean, we meaning India ended up winning 1-0, and he, instead of being praised for winning the series against such a formidable side as the West Indies, was criticized for drawing so many games, and he was dropped as the captain, believe it or not. Venkatravagan became the captain. So I feel, on so many counts, in terms of match impact, in terms of playing in an era without helmets as an opener, it's very different from playing with fully everything guarded in the middle order, and especially in Indian conditions. It's very difficult to, in Gavaskar's era, there are really only 2 world-class batsmen. There was Gavaskar and there was Vishwanath. And nobody else. Everyone else used to chip in. I mean, Srikanth is so well known, but he was just a cameo guy as an opener, right? There was nobody. Even Vishwanath used to get out in the 30s and after reaching 50 too many times. It all up to Gavaskar. When you measure a person's greatness, you really have to compare that person with his contemporaries. That is the true comparison. And Gavaskar was the mainstay of the Indian team for so long, right? I mean, if you see the person, I don't have the stat on the percentage of runs he scored in the Indian team, but I'm sure it would be huge, right? Whereas Tendulkar played in an era where you had Dravid, Lakshman, Ganguly, Sehwag, Yuvraj. I mean, look at the talent. Look at the number of match winners in that team. And yet, too many times we did not win because people were playing for milestones, etc. So that was what was galling. I mean, I could go on and on, but if you look at just the way the 2 people retired, Gavaskar retired right after one-day cricket had hit the scene, right? And we had the World Cup in India, 1987, such a big deal, so much money coming into the game. The guy walks away from it, and his last test innings, like 96, and he was actually hit on the forearm and got caught in the slips of Iqbal Qasim, left-arm spinner of Pakistan, in Bangalore. And I was at the ground, and I happened to be sitting behind the slips, and I knew it had gone off his forearm. On 96, got out, like given out of his forearm, and India lost by some 15 runs. Later on in Bombay, I ran into him at some function at the Cricket Club of India. And I asked him, I mean, I saw that it went off your forearm, didn't it? He said, go look at the scorecard. So the mystery remains.
Amazing.
And just to complete that, Tendulkar, during research for the book, I looked up, his last 20 tests, his average was below 25. I mean, can you imagine that? And that was an era where you had such fantastic talent waiting the wings, all these. He came into the side at the age of 15, and a lot of his milestones are because of that, right? I mean, you have to credit the guy also for his prodigious talent and for working through injuries and playing for 24 years. But why are you keeping out people like Rohit Sharma, Ajinkya Rahane, so many guys? Their entry into the Indian team got delayed because, Sachin should have retired at least 2 years earlier. In his last 20 matches, an average below 25. Can you imagine? You look at Rahul Dravid, his contemporary. His last 20 matches, his average is around 50. Just, I mean, around the same as his career average.
Mm.
So these
Exactly.
are all, things which are different about the two, and that's why I placed Gavaskar higher.
Mhm. I think
I
that
mean,
that's
there's a
very
lot more, but let me leave it at that.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think that's very nicely said because if I remember correctly, Saurav Ganguly and Rahul Dravid and VVS Laxman, all three of them had in fact retired at least a year or two before Sachin did. So that kind of exactly what you said, that the hype of the sports hero and probably the unknown forces that made him keep going until the very end, till 2013. So so Shumita, tell me something. Circling back to his formative years, you the 664 run partnership that he had with Vinod Kamli in the school matches. That was something that I used to look at and think, wow, what an amazing child prodigy. But you've made us look at this event in a very different light, that how selfish of them to keep on going rather than thinking of the win. And you've obviously used that as a as a literary device, if I may say so, to explain some of the other behaviors later on in his career, vis-a-vis the 194 not out, the infamous 194 not out that led to Dravid making an early declaration and so forth. So in your opinion, based on everything that you've seen and read about him over the years, would you say that he was being selfish for the sake of records, or was it a means to an end? That because he was trying to get these runs for the sake of the team, he did have that the team goal in mind, which was to win at all, by any means necessary. So, what would be your answer to that question?
It takes me back to the milieu, right? Middle class background, Dadar, Bombay, where you have to make it, right? And there are so many people, huge country, huge populations, 11 people can get into a team, so many people trying to make it, right? So I feel it was ingrained, this thinking, for had to make an impression personally to be able to make it to the next stage, because this is it's not a game like tennis where you win a tournament at the boys level and then you get attention and you move on, right? Here he did not have the chance to do that. The only way he could get attention and move to the next stage was to have a personal milestone, and a personal milestone that would be written about and talked about everywhere. And in fact, Kambli, I mean, from reports that I've read, I don't know if it's true, apocryphically, Kambli had told him, hey, coach was not on the ground, he had gone somewhere. Kambli had told him that the coach had told him on the phone, hey, you guys have to declare, you have to get the other team out. And Tendulkar decided to ignore it, and they carried on. And the match ended up in a draw. So that's kind of, it manifests itself in so many ways during his career that unfortunately that is the blemish, for a person with such prodigious talent and who was like a fantastic batsman, right? I mean, he could hammer somebody like Shane Warne, and he could hook and pull. Not many Indian batsmen could hook and pull with as much aplomb until his back started troubling him. He was a fantastic puller, as good as Ricky Ponting. With somebody with that kind of talent, India should have won so much more outside the subcontinent. There would have been so many opportunities in, right up to 2000 when Ganguly became the captain. Then we started having a positive record and having some wins abroad and all that. But right through the 90s, nothing with a team like that. That's really, because of that, like, oh, but I need the milestone and then think of the team, So that attitude, you mentioned the Dravid declaration when he was 194 not out. it's the same thing, right? I mean, you are thinking of achieving a milestone when this is like a series in Pakistan after such a long gap. And the real arc rivalry between India and Pakistan. And, in cricket, like it, there were fascinating reasons for so long, and now finally you're there, and you have the opponent on the map. Should the captain be thinking about a double century for Sachin Tendulkar, or should he be thinking of how to beat Pakistan? How does it matter whether he gets to a double century and we don't end up winning? Like, he got a double century in Sydney and we ended up drawing. If we had won that test match, that would have been the first test series win in Australia, and that would have been a feather in Ganguly's cap, right? But we batted into the third day with this guy's double century. Here, I think, Dravid did absolutely the right thing. And I actually was watching that on TV, and I saw Ganguly didn't play that match. He was like injured. So Dravid was the captain. And it was actually Ganguly from behind I don't know this for a fact, but I just saw it and it kind of registered in me that Ganguly was going on prodding Dravid, what the hell is going on? Because, from T till the time they declared, he was going at a snail's pace. And we had Pakistan was ragged by then. We should have been hitting out and got much more than we did, so that our bowlers would have, could set really attacking fields and get after them, right? That's what any captain would want. You go after T and you hammer for 1 hour, and then but he's playing for a double century, and he got so slow that Dravid had to declare. He would have taken another 5 overs at the rate he was going to get the 6 more runs that he needed. You couldn't afford that.
Indeed. And so, Shumita, coming actually back to that 194 not out and that infamous declaration by Dravid, I had the opportunity to actually read Sachin Tendulkar's autobiography on this particular incident. I just wanted to, compare what you had written to what he had written about that incident himself. And if memory serves me right, he said something along these lines that it was day 2 of the test match and not day 4. And he already had an agreement with the captain, Rahul Dravid, that he would have the opportunity to get to his double century, provided that there's 15 overs left in the day. But he felt bad afterwards that they had actually declared when there were 16 overs left in the day. So in hindsight, because your book had come out before, this incident was highlighted in his 2014 book. Would you go back and say that, okay, you know what, maybe he has a point that it wasn't actually the milestone that he was looking for, but he was upset not because of the milestone that he couldn't reach, but because it was a gentleman's agreement that was broken between him and Rahul Dravid. So what would be your response to that?
No, but the fact that he has to put that in the autobiography shows the hubris of the man, right? Here you are putting your own captain under so much pressure. Why have that agreement in the first place? Why are you even talking about your milestone? Your series in Pakistan, everyone's mind should be focused on how do we beat these guys? How do we win? Would you imagine a Virat Kohli telling somebody, hey, hang on, how many overs are you giving me for me to reach a milestone? You can't even think of somebody saying that. It sounds so self-serving, right? That he was such a big player and such a demigod gave him the gumption to go and tell the captain. If any other player had gone and told the captain, then he would have got a kick up his backside, right? What the hell? Why are you talking about your milestone? We have to win the match, and I'll go according to what I feel. There can be any number of bad light can stop play early. There can be any number of reasons, right, where you miss out the opportunity of getting after the opposition team who have been running ragged in the field for 2 days, right? And the first innings is where you put them under pressure and you go on to win the test match. For him to talk about not being on the 4th day, I haven't actually read the book, so thanks for bringing it up. Not being on the 4th day and it being on the 2nd day, etc. It just actually confirms my thesis that he's so caught up with himself. that he's unable to see. It may be like, Steve Jobs was said to have this, you know, distorted perception. I don't know, but there are many things uh, great about Tendulkar, right? I mean, I don't want to belittle that at all. I think the fact that he was such a clean cricketer, went through a huge match fixing scandal, and all these guys, Dravid, Ganguly, Tendulkar, absolutely, above board when it came to these things. There would have been so many temptations. Those days, there wasn't that much money, right? So he's done fantastic things for Indian cricket. No denying that at all. And he was a fantastic batsman, a prodigious talent. But it's just too much. And this is another instance of it, that he would actually defend that. And imagine the pressure on the captain. Instead of thinking of when to declare, how do we bowl, who should bowl, how should how should we attack it, what should be the field, he's thinking about Tendulkar's milestone, and he's actually being put under pressure for that. Do you think that's fair on a captain? I mean, yes, Dravid was not as big a player as Tendulkar, but that's all the more reason to support him, right? And not put him under pressure in such a crucial match, in such a crucial series, first test match. Unbelievable. But that's sports, and that's life, and that's human nature, right? I mean, nothing is black and white. It's all gray. And you find, even gems have some, flaws in them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think you put it very nicely. We all have our flaws, and obviously, the reason that of the book itself is to paint that human picture of Sachin Tendulkar, and to show him for the humanity of Tendulkar, I think. So you alluded to Virat Kohli during the beginning of your answer, Shumita. So I have to ask you, uh, in contemporary times, when at the time that he retired, Virat Kohli was still very new to international cricket. So 9 years have passed since Sachin Tendulkar has retired. Where would you? Yeah, and you did mention that it's hard to compare. But if I were to ask you, would you say that he is probably India's greatest match winner, or would you say that he's still got a bit more ways to go to prove or to get that mantle of being the best match winner for India?
He was. I mean, when it comes to Virat Kohli, it's a before and after question, right? I mean, before 2020, it was a different Virat Kohli, and COVID happened in 2020. What for whatever reason, or the man's hubris got the better of him. It happens to the greatest players. Most of the greatest players go through that. Some don't. Virat Kohli before 2020 is definitely, I mean, the greatest match winner, right? I mean, chasing in one day matches, he was like incomparable. And that is playing under pressure. That is what you admire in a sportsman. How do you do it under pressure? You have Ben Stokes, he doesn't do anything during the entire World Cup, and the final he cracks it. Same in the 2019 ODI World Cup. Have characters like that, Rahul Dravid, hang on, and win in Adelaide. Just 73 runs, not a century, not like a milestone or anything, but what a 6 wickets down. So he was the last guy standing, I think. Virat Kohli before 2020, definitely greatest. Virat Kohli after 2020, I think hubris has got the better of him. The clear flaws in his technique, which kind of crept up on him. He loves to lunge on the front foot. And on Indian wickets, it doesn't matter where the ball pitches, even if it is short of, it's not a half volley. You can play through the line and hit it through extra cover. And he's a master at finding a gap, getting boundaries, crack it through mid wicket, because you can kind of play a little bit across the line because you won't get into trouble. His back foot play has almost disappeared. And Gavaskar was actually the first guy who pointed it out, that and Gavaskar during commentary, he has a habit of cracking jokes, and sometimes they turn out to be inappropriate. You have to just give him allowance, at least I do. But I mean, this was inappropriate. He criticized Kohli's batting, but he added a wisecrack saying that probably his wife has been bowling to him at home because of COVID. So Then he got into a lot of strife. But in all that brouhaha, what was lost was the remark that he made about his batting, and there's no better person than Gavaskar. Had I been Kohli, I would have gone to Gavaskar instead of attacking him over the remark. He apologized, Gavaskar apologized, and all that. I would have actually gone to Gavaskar and asked him, "Hey, what do you see that is wrong? How do I fix this?" And he just went on and on like that, and he's dug himself into such a huge hole now. He not able to get going against spinners in the middle overs, and if you know, he has a lot of things to fix. I actually before 2020, I felt Virat Kohli was the guy. Hardly ever saw him playing a selfish innings. Always plays according to the game situation. He was a master at managing a chase, and he had that. Rohit Sharma was, I think, even more talented, but Kohli had in terms of just the stroke making ability, right? But in terms of finding that perfect balance between uh, caution and aggression, Kohli was a master. He was, and he's so good when you look at him batting. It's just so compact and so crisp. But if he keeps lunging on the on the, I think now during the World Cup and just before that, he started to work on that a little bit because a lot of guys have been pointing it out. It's also, when you become so big, there are so many fawning people around you that it gets lost, like they keep praising you, they keep dismissing any criticism that comes from a Gavaskar or somebody else, that you start, getting into that perception problem. I hope Kohli comes out of it. If he comes out of it, and if he has a second wind, and actually Tendulkar went through a very long slump, and then he had a second wind briefly around 2010. He made a century, match-winning century in New Zealand and all that, and then he again went into a decline. If Kohli has another purple patch, then I would consider him the greatest. Otherwise, he'd be another one of those who just prolonged their career at the expense of the team. In that sense, Gavaskar would still remain, for me, the greatest.
That's yes, exactly, rightly said and rightly put. So, Shumita, just staying with the contemporary cricketing landscape, where do you see the future of cricket going? Do you feel that international cricket will still have primacy, or is franchise cricket on its way into displacing international cricket? And we're probably going to go the way of football, where we have clubs dominating rather than nations/countries.
I think so. I watch the IPL with more interest these days than bilateral series. Bilateral series will always have their place. I mean, there is, whatever England does these days is like fascinating, right? I mean, the test series that they had against South Africa and India at home, always under pressure, but somehow managing to win this first test match in Pakistan. Unbelievable, right? I mean, it seemed like a completely dead wicket in Multan, and somehow they pulled off a victory. So you will always have those, gems which you will only get with that national fervor and all that in a bilateral series. But I feel actually the removing the national fervor has helped the game. Like look at all the positives that have come from franchise cricket. Firstly, there is more accountability. I mean, a coach will get booted out if he's underperforming, right? And I mean, Rahul Dravid has already underperformed, but he will continue for the next ODI World Cup. And I don't think he's a good coach. He wasn't a great captain either, and he was not a great captain or a coach in IPL. He's not cut out for the modern, T20. He's been successful with the younger players for the junior level and all that. That's because he's a wonderful person, and he's very, he gives people confidence. He gives people the belief that they can do it. All that is great, and he should actually remain at the junior level to nurture the next generation of players. He's not the right coach for the Indian team. But in franchise cricket, that would get sorted out immediately. There's so much money involved. Players will be, picked on the basis of what they are contributing to the team. Maybe, I mean, there Virat Kohli again is an exception. I mean, he's been carrying on with the Bangalore team and failing as a captain for so long, and now failing as a batsman too. There will always be some exceptions, but mostly it is geared towards more accountability, which is a good thing. It is also about giving opportunities to people. A Rohit Sharma or an Ajinkya Rahane don't have to wait for 2 3 years to get into the Indian team, right? I mean, if the guy is good for a franchise team, some franchise or the other will pick them. uh, it removes a lot of the, it opens a lot more avenues for young cricketers to make it. Otherwise, you have to, there's so much of corruption at the state level and all that, right? I mean, you have to bribe some selector to get in, because if you can't even get into the state team, how do you show your talent? You can't showcase yourself at all. But here, like IPL has so many instances of people who were not picked for the state teams, but picked for the IPL team and made it big, I mean, immediately caught attention. Even in the last IPL, there's so many such characters, and that's how new talent is being discovered. There's so much that is good about franchise cricket. And hopefully, because, and most importantly, I think, because the players are being paid so well, we won't have the specter of match fixing rising again. Probably it will still happen here and there, but at least in the Indian Premier League, like, the compensation is very, very healthy and good. So finally, players are getting, maybe still not a fair share, but at least a fairer share of the pie, right? I mean, right from ODI cricket came to India in 1987, huge advertising money, etc., has been pouring into the game, been going into the boards, coffers. But definitely, players were not, uh, uh, they had their own personal advertising and all that, but they were not really getting a fair deal. Here, players are adequately compensated. That makes them give their best. That gives you like the best cricket that you can get from the players. And anybody who runs franchise cricket will have to give them a fair share, because you have to attract the best talent from around the world. So it all works out well. There's more accountability. There's more motivation and compensation for players. There's more discoverability of talent. It's definitely the future. I mean, I don't see it ever going back to bilateral series primacy. Even the ICC tournaments are kind of losing their luster. I don't think this World Cup got as much attention as some of the World Cups would have got earlier, right? I mean, you're playing it just 1 year after the previous one, so not much, not as much interest as I think the IPL will have. And in the IPL, like, you can't take it for granted, right? I mean, Temba Bavuma is captain of South Africa. I mean, how can he be captain of South Africa if his batting record is so poor in white ball cricket? He does not find a place in any franchise team in South Africa. And that's fantastic, right? A captain of your country, but he can't get it. That just shows the difference. Here you have a bunch of selectors who will just, for various reasons, keep him as captain. And that's the reason I think they did not make it. In those conditions down under, South Africa had the perfect bowling attack and some really good batsmen. They could have gone all the way. But you can't do that if you retain Temba Bavuma as captain, right? So it wouldn't have happened in franchise cricket. That's the
Yes.
future, and I love it.
That's wonderful. So I have to ask, do you have an IPL team that you support, or is it the players that you prefer to support? And so do alliances shift when it comes to what team you're supporting, or are you stable with any one team?
So for me, as a sports viewer, whichever game, and these days, of course, I'm watching the Football World Cup. I mean, I derive a vicarious pleasure out of, trying to put myself into players' shoes. I mean, what would it take for a Kylian Mbappe to do what it does, right? So I look at that. So I'm not really a fan of any particular team. I'm just looking at, and for me in cricket, and that is what makes cricket my favorite sport, is like so much of strategy, so much more than in other sports, I feel, because of the sheer number of variables. Like, I mean, pitch, playing conditions, players, the number of things that you can do with the ball, with when you're bowling, when you're batting, like in baseball, it can't pitch on the ground, right? I mean, that takes away like 1 million variations. So there's so much of, strategic thinking involved. If they don't mess it up, They're trying very hard to mess it up, by the way. In IPL now they're going to have this super substitute, which they think, oh, you can bring in a player who is not in the 11 and at various stages, and they think, oh, that will make things more complicated and it will become more strategic. Actually, you're removing the strategic dilemma, right? I mean, picking that 11 is itself like the biggest strategy call. And you pick that 11 before a game, before you really know how the pitch is going to behave, how things are going to pan out. If you remove that and you allow one 12th guy to come in, you're removing that strategic dilemma for a coach and captain. Anyway, if they don't mess it up too badly, I think it will remain interesting. And like I said, for me, it is the strategy part of cricket that really, whether you're a bowler, batsman, how are you managing your innings? You want to go gung ho from the beginning, but also temper it. How do you manage it like a Ben Stokes? How do you manage it as a coach? How do you manage it as a captain? That's what keeps me fascinated. So it's really not about any particular team. It's just the game itself.
Hmm. I think I absolutely concur with you when it comes to the strategy, pitch conditions, etc. Yeah, cricket is a far more interesting game, sport than a lot of other sports that I've come across, including football. Now, Shweta, our hour is almost up, but I cannot
No.
let you go. I cannot let you go without first asking you a couple of questions related to books, because we are, after all, a book podcast. So, what books are you currently reading, and what would be some of your favorite books that you would recommend that everybody should read at least once in their lifetime?
Oh, that's a big one. So let me start with Dominic Lapierre, right? He's just passed away. And I really enjoyed reading his autobiography, A Thousand Suns, and all his books, the early ones with Larry Collins. Oh, Jerusalem gave me, I love historical, uh, you know, books because, you get characters, plus you get the historical context. And I think what also attracted me was that they were journalists, right? And journalists who learn to write uh, in a novelistic form. I think that brings out the best of both, right? I mean, you're being creative, but you're also sticking with, you're also conveying so many things happening around us. So, Oh, Jerusalem is Paris burning, City of Joy, of course, about Kolkata. So Dominic Lapierre, I should mention, he's just passed away, and I really enjoyed his autobiography. And I like his, they have this way of engaging a reader. And I learned about, I mean, being a journalist myself, I learned about that. I mean, that's my like Bible of journalism. It's by Tom Wolfe, called The New Journalism. It's quite an old book, but those techniques that he talks about in that book, many people actually uh, practice it without acknowledging it, but you can see Tom Wolfe's influence on them. Michael Lewis is another favorite actor of mine because he takes that very involving kind of journalistic approach to bringing out big stories, like his Undoing project about Daniel Kahneman and the Israeli psychologists who wrote Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. That's like fascinating. Uh, in cricket, I think the book that I really loved is a guy who came up with the line, "What do they know of cricket who only cricket know?" Right? So he was actually a political commentator, CLR James. He wrote this book, Beyond the Boundary. It's absolutely fascinating. Such a good read, also. It's a literary book and not just a cricket book. So CLR James, Beyond the Boundary is fantastic. I mentioned Tom Wolfe, Dominic Lapierre. I also write a lot about startups, right? And actually, currently, I'm reading a fascinating book called Product Led Growth by a guy called Wes Bush. It's quite a new concept. It's about products selling themselves instead of you going and demoing products, etc. You create the product. And Bangalore and neighboring Chennai is full of SaaS companies, right? Software as a service software that you use on the cloud. And how do you make a product sell itself? Like a user goes and he should be able to try it out himself and get engaged. and then get to the pricing, etc., instead of you having to go and sell to him. And that really works for people from India, right, selling in the US market. So yeah, product-led growth is, I mean, if you're into tech, and that's a book that I would highly recommend.
Wonderful. And because I do sales for a living, I think that's probably one book that I
Oh,
would love to
yes.
have on my reading
It,
list. So yeah,
it,
thank you so much
yeah,
for
it sounds like bad news. I mean, if a product sells itself, you don't need a sales team.
that.
But,
That's
but
true
it
as
isn't.
well. Yeah.
But it
I'll
isn't.
be
It's
on with
actually
job.
how a sales team can also use that approach to just change its approach. It's a like a paradigm shift, and it's quite new on the scene. It's still in its infancy. I mean, the true nitty gritty and nuances of it haven't yet come out fully. So that's always very interesting.
Indeed.
Westwood is the author.
Okay. Okay. I'll make a note of that as well. So, Shumita, just before letting you go, finally, I do have one last question because,
Oh, and
uh,
one thing, let me share a secret.
yeah,
Don't buy the book, because I actually bought the book, but later when I went to his website, I found he has put the entire book there for free.
for free. Wow. So it's open access. So that makes it doubly
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think I had one book here I'm using as a prompt to make sure this book doesn't fall. The Almanac of Naval Ravikant.
Oh
After I
yeah,
bought the book, I
yeah,
realized that he also had it uh,
yeah.
available for download. So that's great that knowledge is something to be shared and not to be hoarded. So kudos to all these authors who are doing that. But Shumita, coming back to my very last question, I promise you this will be the last one. We have a ODI World Cup coming up next year, where all the matches are going to be hosted in India. It's not going to be co-hosted by Pakistan or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. And and I hate to bring it up because, but India just lost a series to Bangladesh, a bilateral series 2-0, and we have
Oh,
one.
yeah. Fascinating. Both the games were so close, right? Really good.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
these guys needed a kick up their backsides. Thank you.
Yeah. And yes, and what I was going to say was that this with the level of expectations that comes with hosting a World Cup. We've seen since 2015 that, so in fact 2011, the last time that India had won the ODI World Cup. 2015 has been Australia, and they were also the host. 2019 England, and they were the hosts. So how do you feel, or how optimistic are you about India's chances of bringing the trophy home next year at the 2023 World Cup, given what we just saw, and their results in Bangladesh? What would be your answer to that?
See, on paper, it should be a shoe-in for India, right? I mean, like, look at all the bilateral series in India. India has been thrashing everyone. New Zealand, West Indies, Sri Lanka, South Africa, whoever has come has absolutely got thrashed. Australia. Uh, Look at the number of players in the IPL, so familiar with the conditions, and so good at exploiting these conditions. Everything. Spinners not that great, but I think the pace bowling and batting so good. Right? It should on paper be an absolute shoe-in, right? But like, I'm always a skeptic, and I look a little beyond that, and I see that there are serious problems. And it's not about the pressure of home conditions and all that. They are used to pressure, these guys. IPL is huge pressure. You can't go in with this top three. Like Rohit Sharma is past his prime, Virat Kohli is past his prime, KL Rahul is like kind of, he's the one guy who is a little self-serving, I feel at times. You need to give like guys, you either have to make these guys like Rohit Sharma has been trying to set an example where you don't put that huge a price on your wicket. You have to change your approach. All World Cups, I think India had very good chances, even in England. I mean, actually at the league stage, India topped the league, right? But we lost in the semi-finals. Selection has been a problem. They need better selection in the spinners. Pace bowling, there's actually so much, but you have to get the right mix. There's too much choice is actually bad for India.
Understood. Yeah. I think it's an embarrassment of riches, like they say. So I think it's obvious that maybe a lot of the players who should be in are not getting noticed, or people may have forgotten about them. But very nicely said. I think I do agree with you. So Shumita, as I mentioned, that would have been my last question, but I do have to ask you one more just to make
Okay.
sure that and it's for the benefit of our viewers and our listeners. If anybody wanted to get in touch with you, are you active on social media, or can they reach you by email? Where can they find out more about your work and what projects you're currently working
So my surname like is unusual, right? Because it has an E, Chakraberty. I don't know. My dad probably anglicized it. I don't know who the original sin where it comes from, but it is Bertie.
on?
So that makes it very easy for me. My email ID is chakraberty@gmail.com.
Right.
That's one of the advantages, right? I mean, nobody else in this world has a Chakraberty. So chakraberty@gmail.com and @Chakraberty is my Twitter handle. So
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so Sumit Chakrabarty, it has been a pleasure to speak to you, sir. I absolutely loved your book, and I highly recommend it to all our listeners, to all our viewers. I think that we need more books like these that present a contrarian truth to us. Thank you very much for being on Book Cafe podcast, and we hope to have you back with us very soon for another chat. Thank you once again.
thank, thank you for the wonderful question. I love the comparison with Gavaskar, the stat about only 6 out of 34 producing victories, the Rahul Dravid scenario, the quote from Sachin's book. Some really good questions, and thank you. I love to talk cricket, and you brought that out.
Okay. All right then. All right. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch then. Take care.